thank you for inviting me to share my son's story with you. As she said, my name's Mary. I was born and raised in Edgerton. And we're going to talk about something today that nobody really likes to talk about. Addiction, drugs, alcoholism. On April 18th, 2010, my phone rang at 4:15 that morning. And my life and my entire family's life changed forever. And even the next generation. And because of that, standing in that emergency room that morning, I felt a passion in my heart like I have never felt in my entire life. And so Never Let Go Ministries, I believe, was born at 5:16 a.m. that morning when my son's heart quit beating. And with that, I want to back up a little bit, and I want to tell you about my son, because my son was an awesome young man. He was born on April 16th in 1979 in Montpelier at the hospital, greeted home by his dad, me, his older sister, Christy, and then 2 years later he had a little brother named Ian. Marjo was a strong-willed child. He was the one that tested my patience once in a while, but he made me laugh. He softened my heart. I raised him. I have been involved in church, St. Mary's in Edgerton my whole entire life. That's where my parents raised me. And I wanted to give my children the same foundation that I had, and that was faith, a belief in God, to hang on to all the storms that came along in life. So I raised my children that way, and we went to church, we did the nightly prayers, we read Bible stories, we did all of the above. And when the children were 10, Marjo would have been about 5, Ian would have been about 3. Their father and I divorced. So I was raising 3 children on my own for quite some time. And during that time, I talked to them constantly. They went through the DARE program, graduated from DARE, were never going to touch alcohol, was never going to do any drugs. And then all of a sudden, Marjo turned 14. My daughter had just went to college that fall. And Marjo turned 14 years old, he had just turned 14. And in that fall, on my daughter's 19th birthday, my mother passed away. And I had taught my children a lot about life and about faith and about God and about making your life good and being full of hope. But I had never really talked to my children about grief and sudden death because really they had never experienced that. And and my children were very, very close to my parents, very close. Grandma and Grandpa, they went down there. I think they wanted to go down there as much as they wanted to be home. And I look back now and I think for a 14-year-old going through puberty, getting ready to go into the high school, he had attended St. Mary's School before that, up until 6th grade. Marjo ran track, he played ball. He was the normal child. I'm sure all of you have got children and grandchildren that are on the right track, and hopefully you won't have to worry about them. But that day that my mother passed away, I think was a turning point, because I think Marjo, going through the puberty and everything, did not know how to handle grief. And I would say, "Are you doing okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. Well, 3 months after my mom passed away, she had passed away on my daughter's 19th birthday, and 3 months later, I started hearing different names coming up, friends that I was not familiar with, and I ended up finding out one night that he was at a party. So I went to investigate the party in Edgerton, and my son was drunk. So I brought him home. I was devastated, and genetics play a huge part. There was a lot of reasons why I had concerns there, and I'm adopted, so, I don't know what's in my genes either. And I talked and talked and talked and talked. Well, I just drank a little bit, and, I tried to explain to him a little bit is not good, you're 14. So that was the beginning of the dark years. The innocent years were now gone. My little sweet little kid that used to run around and smile and laugh, I couldn't find anymore. And yes, I got him into counseling. Yes, he started staying out later with a different group of friends, and I would call the policeman if he wasn't home on time. I really seriously think I did everything I could. And my husband now, Victor, and I, we would smell the alcohol on the breath, and I'd get him into counseling, and then he'd say he's not going to do it anymore. And people think that marijuana is not a gateway. Well, pretty soon we started smelling marijuana on him when he'd get home. And there again, you know, it was step after step after step, a decline that we saw coming. Everything I tried, it seemed like it didn't work. And he ended up graduating from Edgerton High School. I was very proud of him for graduating because he'd gotten in trouble and he didn't like school and all that, but he did graduate. And then he decided to move. He moved to Auburn, Indiana. And it was probably in about 5 years later than that, I was sitting at Fleetwood one day getting ready to go into work. Somebody knocked on my window and it was Marjo. And I knew that something was going on in my son's life, but I'm not living in my house anymore. I, you know, couldn't tell what it was. And he told me that he needed help. And I said, Marjo, what's the matter? And he told me he was shooting heroin. And for a mom who had did everything she could to keep my children from even drinking, and here my son was admitting this to me. And I went into work. I don't even know how I even got through work that day, but I did. And we met that night, and we talked to him. And I said, how did that happen? Years later, he would write a letter that talked about that very first night. And I always share this with the students because his idea was he would never do this either. And he wrote in this letter, years down the road, I always had a very curious mind when it came to drugs, but told myself I would never touch a needle. And I kept true to myself, that is, until what I still believe was a turning point in my drug use. And he mentioned a situation in his life that was not his fault, but you know, we all have situations that come up, and it's our choice on how we're going to handle it. And he wrote in this letter, I was a little scared at first, but it only took once, just once, and I was in love. The next 10 years was one hardcore downward spiral. Little did I know that the Lord had been knocking at my door the whole time. So we got him help in Toledo. He went to a place called Compass. And at that time, there was nobody to talk to because all of my friends had children that were not drinking, at least that I knew of. They were not using drugs. And a few of my very close church friends knew about it, but it wasn't the kind of thing that we could say out loud. You just didn't go around telling that your child was using. And I remember standing in the bathroom several times, bawling my head off, looking at that woman in the mirror, saying, your son's a heroin addict. Because it was so hard to comprehend, to wrap my brain about this little boy that I had tucked in every night and prayed our prayers every night and went to church every solid week and watched him play sports, and all of a sudden now he's a heroin addict. Well, he decided that he wanted to get away from this area and get away from everything. So he moved down to Indiana, where his father was living at the time. And he stayed down there. He fathered a little boy down there. He stayed down there, and he would come back, you know, every so often. It was 4.5 hours away. And in 2009, I happened to be over here at St. Michael's at church one night, attending Mass. And when I got home, Victor said to me, we got a phone call, you better sit down. And Marjo had overdosed. So we ran down there and we picked him up. He had survived. He overdosed on prescription pills. See, once you get hooked on the marijuana, and I've had students argue with me, it's not a gateway, it's not going to hurt you. But yes, it does, because I haven't met an addict yet that did not smoke marijuana. I have met many addicts who have been shooting heroin and said that they would never, ever, ever had thought that they would have ever gotten there. But here we are, we're bringing him back, and we ended up 6 weeks, 7 weeks later, he stole from us. I mean, things happen that you just don't want to admit that your child would do. And one day my husband got up to go to work, and there was pills laying outside on the ground, and there was quite a scene in the house. We could tell he came home pretty messed up. So my husband took off work at noon that day, and he said, you know, he's got to get some help. But before that, when he came back from Indiana, he had turned his back on his faith all these years, and it was Easter week. And this would have been about a week and a half after he got back from Indiana. And we ended up going to church, Victor and I did. And when I got home, Marjo, I told him I was going back up. It was Holy Thursday. And Marjo ended up going up there with me. Why, I don't know. I'll never know. But I remember kneeling in the front row of that church where I told God several times he could have my life if he would bring my son back. And I remember just praying to touch Marjo's shoulder, Lord. Just let him know he's not alone. And when Marjo and I left that night, he told me that he had felt a hand on his shoulder and that he had saw his sweatshirt move. So I knew, but then that night he had a nightmare, and he said that he dreamt that somebody had came and taken him to a party and he had fallen into a hole and they were feeding him drugs and he couldn't get back out. And he asked me what I thought that meant. And here's my 30-year-old 6'4" guy saying, "What do you think that meant, Mom?" And I said, "You felt the hand of Christ last night." I said, "I think this is a warning that the next time you fall into the hole, you may not get back out." 6 weeks later, he did fall into that hole again, and that's the morning that Victor woke up, found pills on the outside. So Victor came home that day and said, "Today's the day, we've got to do something or we're going to lose him." So there's a picture up here of my son the first night at rehab. And when we told him that he had to go get some help, he was very upset with me. And as he threw his clothes in a duffel bag upstairs, he was yelling at me and saying, "I can't believe you're doing this." And I remember looking directly into his eyes, looking up at him and saying, "Marjo, if anything ever happened to you, I could not go on. That's the reason why we're trying to get you help." So we took him, my youngest son and I took him to the Salvation Army Rehabilitation Center in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I cannot say enough good things about that place. And throughout the next 8 months, Marjo started coming back to his faith. He got clean and sober. He said it was the first time in the 15 years that he had felt like somebody understood him. So on January 17th, he graduated from rehab. 7 years ago, it was on January 17th, 2010. He had just found out he had a baby on the way. Him and a girlfriend from his past up here had gotten back together on some of his, when he'd get out on weekends. And he was very excited about his future. He wanted to start talking to the youth about the dangers of alcohol and drugs. And that is who I am today. I'm my son's voice because he's not here. But he stood up there at graduation and he looked at all them guys and their families and he said, "If I can make it through rehab, anybody can make it through rehab." And they kind of chuckled because they said he was one of the biggest challenges over there. And he also said something else. He said, "If you think positive, positive things will happen. If you think negative, negative things will happen." That was January 17th. On April 16th, 3 months later, it was my son's birthday. And it was not a good night. We had a birthday party for him at his little brother's house. I made him chocolate cake with his chocolate frosting, but I knew that something was wrong. And I wanted to call him the next day because I was upset with him that night. I did not understand addiction. I had no clue why somebody just didn't quit. Not anything like I understand now. But the next day when I got home from work, I was still apprehensive about calling him because as a parent, we don't want to make him upset. We don't want to make him think that we don't trust him anymore. He had moved in with his girlfriend over to Montpelier, and I finally called him after Mass that night, and he ended up passing out on me while we were talking on the telephone. My husband went to Montpelier to check on him, and he came back and he said he's still sleeping. He said, "We're just going to let him sleep it off." And I said, "Tomorrow, I am going to go over there as soon as I get off work." I said, "We've got to do another intervention." And the phone rang at 4:15 that morning, April 18th. We hopped in the car and we ran over to Montpelier, to the apartment. And on the way in the car, I remember praying the whole time over there, not knowing what was going to happen, because all his girlfriend has said was he's not breathing. And the words, the scripture, Philippians 4:13, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me," went through my head like a loudspeaker. And I prayed it over and over and over again, all the way to Montpelier. I remember running up like 23 steps, and they were working on him in this bedroom. They brought him out, took him down, the steps, and we went to the hospital. I don't really remember walking in the hospital. I just remember sitting there. And I remember a door opening, and Joanna, his girlfriend, was sitting to the left of me. My husband had just went to get coffee. And I remember hearing the door open, and I looked up, and the guy from the emergency was walking out. And to this day, I have no idea what he said. But I just remember the look in his eyes, and I knew that my son was gone behind those doors. And I remember screaming at the top of my lungs, "No, it wasn't supposed to end this way." because it wasn't supposed to end this way, because he wanted to tell his story. That day changed our lives forever. And in the course of spending nearly 4 hours with him in the emergency room, I questioned everything I had done. Maybe I should have called him 2 hours earlier. Maybe I should have went over there. Maybe I should have did this. But I have learned that I cannot beat myself up anymore because I did do everything I could. But that day, that morning in that emergency room, holding his lifeless body gave me a passion that I never knew was inside of me. 6 months later, I was asked to speak at St. Mary's School in Ashton to the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. And when he first passed, we waited on the toxicology reports. I knew there was no doubt in my mind what it was, and it was prescription drugs. But we waited on the results to come back. Excuse me, and during that time, I talked with his older sister and his little brother, and I'm like, what do you think about coming out with Marjo's story? Because then again, we still don't talk about drugs out loud. It's embarrassing. We feel inadequate. We're embarrassed. We're ashamed. And I said, I'm not ashamed of my son. So he was a beautiful young man that got caught up in the world of addiction. He was not just a drug addict. He was my son. He was a daddy. He was an artist and a poet and a bricklayer. And he was the best friend of many. He was a soulmate. He was not just an addict. So we decided, yes, it's time to come out with Marjo's story. So I went to St. Mary's. And that day, during Red Ribbon Week that year, 6 months after Marjo had passed, I stood in front of them 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, and I saw the tears in their eyes. I saw the compassion in their hearts. I saw fear in their eyes when they heard alcohol, drugs, death. I wanted them to have fear. I want these students to grow up knowing that there's consequences of just beginning. And when I left there that day, I told my husband, after discussing all this with him too, of course, and I said to him, I feel like this is what I'm supposed to do. So 1 year later, on my son's birthday on April 16th, that was my first day, I had quit the nursing home in Edgerton, and I knew that that was what my mission was in life. Since then, Never Let Go Ministries formed because of Marjo's death. Never let go is to never let go of God's hand and never let go of the courage to say no. Never let go of your sobriety if you're in recovery. Never let go of the good friends that can keep you on the right path. Never let go of the hope in your heart that you can have a good and fulfilled future. And that is what my purpose in life is to be my son's voice right now. We have since given probably 130 some presentations. We have spoke to youth groups. We have spoke to schools, Edgerton, Bryan, Sonora. We've been over here at St. Michael's doing the CCD classes over here several different times. Different organizations, because Ohio, unfortunately, is now #1 in our nation for drug overdose deaths. I have sheets up here with the stats written down. You can read them yourself. In the past 6 years since I've lost Marjo, coming up on almost 7 years, I cannot believe how bad the stats, how much they have risen, the deaths. The heroin epidemic is nothing to even, it's absolutely phenomenal out there right now. And we have to be talking to these young adults all the time about the dangers of picking up that first cigarette and drinking that first beer and smoking that first joint, taking pills. Now the government's trying to legalize all this marijuana stuff, which makes it look like gummy bears. Our United States and our state right now is in a disaster. There are so many people that need help out there. And we have met so many beautiful people during the last couple years. One of the young ladies that we just met here a few weeks ago called us, got a hold of us on Facebook. She had heard us at the Juvenile Detention Center a couple years in a row. She had lost 2 people in her immediate family from a drug overdose. This young lady is 17 years old, a beautiful young lady. She has someone in prison right now in her immediate family. She has someone in rehab right now in her immediate family. She needs hope. And she herself has struggled, 17 years old. Genetics, there again, play a part. If they never start, they're never going to have to worry about the genetics kicking in. There are so many avenues that we have to look at. We have to look at the neighbor that may look despondent and discouraged. You know, we try to ignore all this, but all it's doing is making our stats go up because we don't want to talk about it. I don't like talking about it either. It's not the kind of job that I felt like I was going to be doing at this time in my life. I told somebody recently, you know, I used to work at the nursing home in Exerton after Fleetwood closed. And when I first started there, after working in a factory and being around vibrant people all the time, and then I'm working in a nursing home, and I used to think that that was kind of discouraging. You know, you're working with these beautiful older people, and some of them are on their way out to their next life, but those people were ready. They have lived good, long lives, and now I'm working with families, dealing with moms who have just buried a 20-some-year-old child, just buried a 30-year-old child. I am in touch with a woman from Cleveland, Ohio right now who lost her 30-year-old in August and lost her 20-year-old son in October. 7 weeks apart, she lost 2 boys. And I don't even know how to give her hope, because I can't imagine losing another son right after I'd already lost Marja. I couldn't imagine it 20 years down the road. But there are so many avenues. These young adults that get strung up in that vicious circle of drugs and alcohol. There was a young man that we met at the juvenile detention center just recently. He actually won one of our Never Let Go t-shirts, and he actually is buried in that t-shirt. He got out of the juvenile detention center good to go, was positive about his life, and he relapsed 4 days later. I had someone tell us at our support group, we started a support group 4 years ago. It's called FAITH. It's at the Bryan Hospital, Families of Addiction Inspired Through Hope. And we started that because I wanted a place for people to come and be able to talk. I didn't want a mom to have to stand in the bathroom with a locked door looking in the mirror, telling herself that there was an addict in her family, her child. I wanted a place where people can come and try to gain hope. So during one of our meetings, this has probably been 3 years ago, there was a lady that came and she said, I want everybody to just close their eyes for a little bit. So we all closed our eyes, and she said, put your head down and just take a great big deep breath of air. And I was kind of like, you know, wondering what she was getting at. So there was silence in the room, and we put our heads down, and I took my deep breath, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and I was about ready to and all of a sudden she finally said, okay, you can take that breath now. And we were all, and she said, that's what it's like to be an addict. That's what it's like to need that next fix, that next strength. And when she said that, I all of a sudden wanted to run and find Marjo for 2 minutes and tell him I'm sorry. Because I remember when I used to look at him and say, how can you jeopardize relationships in your family? How can you do this to your children, to your girlfriend? But I did not understand addiction like I do now. We went to a drug conference in Columbus just this past December, the beginning of December. They had a phenomenal speaker down there. There again, he told the scientific aspect of addiction. It blew my mind. I never understood it. I've talked to addicts right now that fight every solid day, every solid minute, that voice in their head telling them one last time would be okay. Well, Marjo heard that voice. I don't know what happened that night. I think he got stressed. You know, he used to tell me that my religion, my faith was nothing but a crutch, and I used to tell him that my crutch was healthier on me than his was on him. But during all that time, he was using his drugs as a crutch. And once he got out, he had to start his whole entire life over again and figure out what he was going to do from here on. How are you going to handle stress? I've got a young lady right now that I'm very close to that's getting very close to getting out of rehab. I said to her last week, so what's your plans when you get out? Well, I don't know. I said, do you have a game plan on what to do when you get stressed? I don't know, I'm doing good. I'm like, Marjo was doing good. No, I really am. I'm very confident this time. I said, Marjo was very confident too. You know, the addict, the people in recovery, they get upset because there's family members. Are you doing okay? And I tell them, be thankful if you've got somebody checking on you all the time and harping on you all the time, because at least we are making them accountable to us I wish now I would have checked on Marjo more often. Maybe I could have caught him right in the nick of time before he took them pills. I think in his mind here, that little voice in his head, oh, one more time ain't gonna hurt, it'll make you feel better for a little bit. But instead it took his life. The overdose statistics right now are absolutely ridiculous. We had a person come into our office just a few weeks ago, shared how many times that he had tried to take his life. He's on the recovery road right now, but he needs encouragement. These people, and there's a fine line between enabling and supporting, and I learned that the hard way because I know there was times when I'm sure I enabled Marjo, but we have to encourage him. If we don't have hope, we have nothing. If they don't have hope, they have nothing either. But we as a community can make a difference out there. And I used to think, well, one person can't make a difference. But if each one of you go share Marjo's story with just one person, if each one of you reach out to one person that you think may be struggling, share the story. Deputy Engel, now Sheriff Engel, spoke at our public forum this last summer in Edgerton that Never Let Go Ministries put on. And he said that if you have not talked to children by the time they're in 3rd grade, it's too late. I would have had no idea when I grew up in 3rd grade what drugs and alcohol. I mean, I wasn't raised like that. I had no idea. But it's alarming to think that we need to start talking to children and warning them, and especially if there's genetics in the family. And I had someone ask me today, do you see any light at the end of the tunnel? Do you think it's going to get any better? Unfortunately, we know of young ladies who are using heroin and they're pregnant. So these babies, I don't know if you know the stats on babies being born to addiction, but it's so high, it's unbelievable. And these babies, there again, they have to go through the withdrawal. They have to go through the hell that the addict does in order to come out of it. Some of them are treated with methadone, but there again, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years down the road, what if that young person falls off a slide and gets a broken arm and has to go through surgery and they have pain medicine? Will they become an addict innocently? So it's something that we have to constantly work at. And no one wants to be the addict. You know, my son did not want to be an addict. I have met such awesome, incredible, talented, intelligent people who have become addicts. School teachers, nurses. I mean, it's unbelievable the people that we have met on this journey in the past 7 years. And not one of them ever said, yeah, I just woke up one day and decided to be an addict. Nobody wants to be an addict, but they fall into it. Sometimes it's nothing short of just having an emergency surgery, doctor prescribing too many pain pills. You know, they're not aware of it. Teenagers, definitely, they think they're infallible anyways. I mean, they don't think anything's ever going to happen to them. So we as a community have to stand up. We have to stand up and talk to the students, to the young people. We have to encourage those who are struggling right now. We have to bring hope. We have to reach out to those who are mourning. I've got several moms right now who are walking that road of grief right now. A woman from Edgerton also who lost her son. And, you know, I have to prove to them that they're going to be able to keep going. But by joining together and becoming one, we can help. Are we going to end this epidemic? I doubt it. I think it's so huge right now that nobody even knows what to do. But we can start one person at a time, one talk at a time. We can make a difference. If we never let go of the courage to get out there and speak our piece and talk about addiction, not like it's some filthy, nasty disease that needs covered up underneath a viaduct or underneath a bridge. It's beautiful, beautiful people that are getting involved in that. So we need to reach out. We have all kinds of material up here. You're free to take any of it. I have a lot of my son's pictures. When we do our PowerPoint presentation, it's divided up into 3 categories. The white is the innocent years, the black is the dark years, and the red one is the road to recovery. And we have stats up here on the board that I mentioned Ohio. Heroin overdose in Ohio in 2001 were 81. Last year, I just got the new figure from Drug Free Action Alliance out of Columbus. In 2015 in Ohio was 1,424. Now these are only the ones that are accounted for. And like in the case of my son's death, he died in Montpelier, but his autopsy was done, the toxicology report and the autopsy was done in Toledo. So that death did not count as Williams County, it counted as Lucas County. So see, we're not seeing these huge stats for Defiance and Henry and Fulton because the toxicology reports are being done in Lucas County, and that does make a difference. The Ohio drug overdose deaths overall in 2000 was 411. In 2015, 3,050 overdose in Ohio alone. When I wrote this slip, 6 people every day were dying in Ohio, and I just got a statement from Drug Free again on that went up to, I think it's almost 8 now. Every solid day in the United States, someone's dying. So last year we basically came in the nation as 48,000 overdose deaths. Over 48,000. So we have topped motor vehicle crashes since 2007. We are definitely topping, unfortunately, the soldiers. Drug addiction and drug overdose deaths have taken the #1 thing in this United States. So I thank you for your attention today, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask, and I hope I have an answer for you. But just remember to never let go of the courage to get out there and talk about something that really needs talked about. We just really need to do everything we can as individuals and as a whole community to do what we can to help those out there who are struggling. So thank you very much. I guess that was pretty well timed. So if anyone has any questions.